Hi folks, welcome to Set Apart Homestead. This is Travis, and today I want to talk about just the threats that you may face in an SHTF situation. You know, every such situation is going to be different, whether it's a personal SHTF, a regional one, all the way up to some global apocalyptic one. It's all going to be different, so it's hard to just say, hey, this is the thing to watch out for, because we all experience our own throughout our life, not just, some asteroid hitting the planet and wiping out mankind. So what would be some of the things that would be very dangerous for you, that would be a serious threat to you, let's say in just general situations? This is kind of what we call a threat assessment. It's part of your preparedness plan. It's part of how your mind should work, getting your mind ready for possibly something happening, and getting yourself physically ready, physically fit, having the supplies that you need, being in the location that you should be in, those types of things. So let's do a threat assessment. Some of the number one things that you hear about, and this is very commonly taught in survival, which is, it's all true, nothing incorrect. Things like your basic needs, your air, water, shelter. It's actually air, shelter, water, food. Those types of things are, of course, very critical. They're critical to survive, but they are not necessarily a threat. Now, could there be a threat or a danger from not having those? Absolutely. But let's talk about some things that, to kind of get your mind thinking about this, that will be something that you need to plan for. And when you do this, when you come up with all these ideas that, okay, if there is an ice storm, what is our greatest risk? What is our greatest danger? Could be, being without electricity or being without water. It could be cold temperatures and no way of heating your home. If there was a hurricane, what are the dangers there? Lack of food, lack of clean water, possible disease, spreading of disease and, bacteria and stuff because of floodwaters. These are the things that you should be doing, preparing your mind, but also preparing yourself physically. And writing them down does not hurt, certainly. So that way you can kind of get your mind kind of wrapped around the ideas of, like, what is it that I'm actually preparing for? Okay, I have food, I have water, I have shelter, but what is it? And you can't just always just say, well, I'm preparing for SHTF. I use that term a lot, but what are you preparing for? And it gives you, when you start setting down specifics of the types of scenarios that you may come across in your life, it could just be that you lost your job. That can be, a big deal for a lot of people. So what are the dangers of if you lose your job? Not being able to pay for your mortgage, put food on your table, those types of things. And when you do that, then you're better able to actually plan for them. And again, this is, doing a risk assessment or a threat assessment. Personally, regardless of what happens, especially, and this becomes more and more true, the greater the SHTF it is, people are going to be your greatest threat. Your greatest threat is not necessarily from the wildlife. Your greatest threat probably isn't from some type of, natural or even man-made disaster. Your greatest threat isn't starvation. Your greatest threat isn't lack of water. A lot of times your greatest threat is our people, because people can be very dangerous. While individuals can be great, when people are massed together, they become fearful and they get this herd mentality. It's, kind of like, for those of you that's been around cattle, you go out to one cow and she's out in that field by herself, or maybe she's just in a part of the field by herself. And she's not that easy to spook. Sometimes, but not that easy. She may stand her ground for a while. She may even charge at you. And if she does run off, it's a little bit, but you know, she seems to be pretty brave. She's gonna, and she'll stand there and kind of think about it. She'll kind of assess, you know, what you're doing out there, what she needs to do, how she should react. Now, take about 150, 200 of them, or maybe even more, and you put them together and you have a herd mentality. And you have one or two making a decision for the whole herd because the rest are just falling in behind. And it's easy to spook them. It's easy to get aggression out of them. And it's very easy to cause a stampede. And that's how humans are. When they get grouped together, they become quite dangerous because they're just not thinking. And then when they are running out of food, running out of water, running out of medical supplies, just their basic needs, then they become even more dangerous. I read a news article just this past week down in Venezuela that there were, I believe, since all this happened, or maybe it was just in the last few days, I can't remember the timeline that they gave, but they said that there had been over 300 people seriously injured or killed just because of rioting, of trying to get to food, people fighting over food and fighting over medicine, fighting over water. That they'd estimated that there'd been 300 seriously injured and killed just doing that. And, you know, it's kind of just getting going down there, and it's just, you know, it's not some kind of global catastrophe that we could, you know, not see the end of it, meaning that, you know, if there was some type of massive disaster and people, you know, got to thinking that, you know, there's no one coming to help, it could be even worse because it's that desperation starting to set in. So people are certainly the thing that you have to probably prepare the most against. And that's difficult because, you know, how do you prepare for that? Hunker down and cut yourself off from the rest of the world during a situation like that. That's definitely an option. But then there, of course, are other things. And people is probably the one that you may not think about as much, but that you should definitely be preparing yourself for. People on the outside that just happen to remember, hey, you know, Joe down the road there, you know, I remember he was always talking about, you know, we got to get prepared for things because, you know, never know what might happen. And I've watched him bring in, you know, buckets of food and bags of food in his house. I bet that guy is loaded with supplies. Let's go down there and check him out. Or it could just be people, you know, going through and robbing you and shooting, you know, holding you at gunpoint or shooting you or, you know, and taking your things. Maybe it's your family, your cousins, your aunts, uncles showing up and say, hey, we're starving. Can you take us in? People can be a danger. And then, of course, there's people spreading diseases. So there's all sorts of things that you need to consider when you're thinking about the threat of people. And along with that, consider other threats. Like I said before, consider your basic needs. Food, shelter, water, clean water. And that's going to be something very serious to consider, because if you don't have a good, strong, clean water source, or a way that you know pretty confidently that you can purify that, depending on the situation, water sources could become extremely polluted. For instance, if there was, say, an EMP, there are predictions and possibilities that if that happened, that municipal water sources and the areas where they clean sewage treatment plants could back up and overfill into just your streams and rivers, things like that. You know, if there were a lot of people dying off, maybe if there was some type of pandemic, you know, the amount of dead bodies is going to create disease, and that could start contaminating water supplies. So, you know, water is going to be very critical. You need to kind of plan that out, and don't just say, well, we got a well. Do you know that, the details of that well? What if that well becomes contaminated? What if the source that feeds that well becomes contaminated? What are you going to do then? Do you have a way to purify your water? And how good is that? Do some research on that. Food. We talk about food all the time, and so do other channels. But what is the, how much food do you have? How much are you able to grow? How much are you able to harvest? Start doing these assessments, and think about all the different scenarios that could possibly happen. Now, maybe not able to figure out all of them, but at least start, going through and coming up with what are some of the things that I should be, planning for. Like I said, loss of job, personal injury, a death in the family, ice storm, snowstorm, rains, flooding, tornadoes, hurricanes, those types of natural disasters. And then, you can go on up to the bigger ones, earthquakes, a large earthquake, volcanic eruptions, and just keep going from there of all the possibilities that could affect you in your life. And when you do that, you're able to do an assessment of what are the threats, your greatest threat in each one of these scenarios. And like I said, in most of those, your people are going to probably be the top of the list of your greatest threat. And when you do that, when you come up with this list, these are my threats. These are the things that, in this situation that's going to be the greatest danger to myself and my family. Then you're able to plan, okay, well, what can I do to counteract that danger? What can I do to protect myself from that danger? And then that is how you start with your assessments of what you need to do to plan. And it may be things that you need to have on hand, and it just may be your own self. It may be the location that you live at. Maybe it needs to change, or have a backup location that you need to go to. These are the things that you need to think of. For instance, where we live, and this isn't some big catastrophic global SHTF, but where we live, we have to drive through a couple of creeks to get to our place. And they're low water crossings, but a lot of times in the spring, if we have a lot of rains, they can flood to the point that you can't cross them. This past spring, it was okay. They did rise, but we were able to get across. But the year before that, we had some massive flooding. And for a couple of weeks, because this went on, it would rain, slow down, rain again, slow. And it was like a couple of weeks that we couldn't get out that way. So we had to come up with an alternative plan of how to get out of our home during that disaster, And so that is a threat assessment of figuring out, okay, the only way to there's only one way in and one way out to our place. We need to come up with a different way, a backup plan, and, backdoor exit if this one fails us. And that's what it is. So we have a different route to exit the property if we need to, because the main and really only road coming in, you have to go through these creeks. And if they flood, and they did flood. In fact, 2 years ago, they were, we're talking like 5-6 foot deep or more in certain areas. So it was certainly not going to be crossed by any vehicle. So that is kind of how you need to do your threat assessments. And just, go through it. This isn't, you don't have to have, past military experience or past experience in that type of field that would do that. Anyone can do that and sit down, just start writing out, pull out a piece of paper and say, what are the most likely things that I could experience in my life that would be considered an SHTF, that would be considered disastrous? Maybe you live alone, maybe you're elderly, and you fell and you broke your hip. Well, that certainly could be an SHTF, not just going through the initial injury and surviving, but after that, how can you take care of yourself? Will you be in that condition to take care of yourself for a while? Do you have people that can take care of you? Those type. There's another. That's SHTF right there for you. All the way up to some global apocalyptic one. But like I said, don't forget when you're doing that about people. A lot of people, they put in their assessments, well, food and water and shelter and maybe wild animals where you live, or, disease and things like that. But people are definitely something that you should consider in your threat assessments. And that is the way that you can start developing your SHTF plan. I think a lot of people, they hear that, what's your plan, what's your plan? But they may not quite grasp, where do you start? And that's really a good place to start, is just sit down with a piece of paper and just start writing down what are the things that you could envision yourself going through in your lifetime. Maybe you live in or around a large metropolitan area, high population. What are the threats there? Maybe you live in an area that could be a prime target for an enemy, next to a military base, maybe you live outside of Washington, D.C. or state capital, or, something like that. These are the types of things that you need to put down. And then, of course, where you live, what kind of weather. If you live in Southwest Texas, you're probably not going to put down blizzards. So do this and then figure out all the things that could be dangerous to you, that could cause you harm or danger in each one of those situations. And then that way you can start planning what you need to do, whether it's mentally or physically, to plan for each one of those situations. You may not be able to do them all, but at least start in that direction of planning. Don't just, think, well, I got a bunch of buckets of food in my closet, and I've got some bottled water and some extra blankets and a first aid kit, I'm good to go. Actually start coming up with a plan, and in my opinion, start with your assessments of what you most likely will go through. And that's a good place to start with developing your SHTF plan. All right. That's probably what I got, at least for this. There's a whole lot more, I could probably just keep talking and talking, but just for the sake of time, we'll cut it off right there. But like I said, don't forget that people can be your greatest threat, just because of that kind of herd mentality thing going on. All right. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next video.